Welcome everyone to the Coalition for Marriage YouTube channel. Those of you who join us regularly will know that we have supporters up and down the country and further afield who come from all faiths and none. But a lot of people contact me with worries about what's going on in schools around the teaching of marriage, around the teaching of gender, other bits and bobs like that. And when I've looked for organisations that might be involved in these kind of conversations, there aren't many, but one I've found is the Association of Christian Teachers. And we're going to be talking to two representatives. It's a pleasure to have them with us this morning. Sarah Jane Bentley is a trustee of the ACT, Association for Christian Teachers, and Lizzie Harwood is their executive officer who takes care of the day-to-day business. Let's say hello to them both. First, Sarah Jane, would you like to say hello?
Hi, good morning. I'm joining you this morning between lessons teaching, so it's great to be talking to you about the Association of Christian Teachers.
Great. And Lizzie, hello to you.
Hi there. Yes, I'm joining you this morning whilst I also have a poorly child on the sofa.
Oh dear.
So I do apologise if there are any interruptions, but there shouldn't be. He's having a bit of a rest.
If you're listening to this video and you're not a teacher or involved in the school yourself, but you know somebody who is, can I ask you to forward it on to them so they might find this useful too? Well, it's wonderful to have you both with us, and so you're both involved with children in a big way. Lizzie, I believe you've got a teaching background, and Sarah Jane, you're a teacher in an independent school. Welcome to you both. Now, just tell us a little bit about the ACT. And I'm thinking, if you look at the Education Act, it's quite clear that political issues shouldn't be dealt with children who are of a young age, and for older children, when political issues like, same-sex marriage or gender ideology, when they are dealt with, they should be dealt with in a perfectly fair, objective and balanced way. So why is there a need for something like the ACT?
Christian teachers in the UK, many of them feel isolated. As you kind of stressed, many educational institutions are increasingly hostile to a conservative worldview, conservative with a small c, to a Christian worldview, and especially when it comes to such teaching on marriage, relationships, gender, and so on. And for Christians in education, we believe that the Bible does teach on these topics conservatively. And I think changes to curriculum in England in 2020 provided quite an opportunity for certain groups opposed to Christian teaching to push forward their controversial agendas. And many Christians started to feel increasingly isolated, alone, perhaps coerced into going along with particular practices or promoting ideology they feel uncomfortable. And many Christians, as a result, feel that their faith has to remain hidden. They don't really know how to interact with this new kind of framework. So ACT, we offer professional and spiritual support to Christians who are engaged in education, whether that be preschool, primary, middle school, secondary school, special schools, colleges, university. And we seek to resource them with materials, training and opportunities that will help them live out their faith confidently day by day.
So I've noticed, Sarah Jane, I get a lot of calls from and emails from people who work in schools funded by the state, not that many from private school parents or teachers. Would you say the challenge is the same in the private school sector?
I think it's becoming so. I think it's sad that we live in a society where even marriage has become politicized. And this is partly because the state is reaching so far out of its remit into the realms of education and people's private lives. So independent schools now, that name is sort of misleading because in many regards, independent schools are not independent. We are regulated by Ofsted. And when it comes to RSE, which is the government's new relationships and sex education policy, it is mandatory to teach that, even in independent schools. So we don't have the kind of independence that the name might suggest. And I'm not speaking specifically about the school I work in, but in general terms for independent schools across the country, I think that perhaps this new policy in particular has come as a bit of a wake up or a shock. So, I would suggest that we need to teach about marriage, regardless of whether we're Christian teachers or not. It's foundational to human society. And to teach it as just a political or a legal institution is really reductive, because it's so much more than that. And we do need children to understand the foundations of marriage, why it's such an important part of our cultural history. And of course, that's all tied into our Christian Western heritage.
I can hear exactly what you're saying. Now, a lot of our supporters won't be from a Christian background, but nonetheless, they can see the empirical data in research across cultures and across time about the value of one-woman marriage, not only to the adults, but especially to the children, to their outcomes, and to wider society. And even way back, we did an interview about J.D. Unwin and his assertion that cultures begin to fail when they neglect one woman, one man, monogamous marriage. It's kind of the beginning of the end for cultures. So in many ways, it's a very, very important thing that does need focus and attention on. But some of our supporters, when they ring up, they reflect this view that school, which used to be a place where you learn how to be a useful member of society and how you can contribute, seems to have changed to be a place where you have the opportunity to explore your self-expression and discover yourself. Now, is that something that your members and that your fellow teachers are discovering or learning as well, or is that just my supporters?
That's a good question. I mean, I suppose we certainly seek to support the perspective of teachers primarily. So we don't necessarily have that input from parents to give that particular nuance. I certainly know that, the biggest concern most of our members have is about such issues, and not necessarily, coming from the perspective of exploration, but it being suggested or it being told to them that they must follow a particular party line, that they must cover certain issues with a certain tack, and that actually there isn't a place for a slightly different perspective, which of course is not accurate. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there is, or there was, and I think perhaps the tide is starting to turn, there was a bit of a kind of a bandwagon where certain campaign groups were really jumping on this new curriculum to push forward particular agendas. And I think teachers, Christian teachers, or those that didn't have any faith, felt a bit uncomfortable, but a little bit lost with regards to knowledge of what they actually should be doing. And actually there has been a bit of a backlash now, and I think we're seeing, aren't we, that the way that government departments and schools are withdrawing from the more kind of liberal groups that have been promoting and developing certain curriculum to do with the exploration of gender identity and their sexual orientation, etc. So we want to support those who feel that they are still a bit confused, who again may feel coerced or pressure in the staff room, because actually there is some space within this legislation for Christians and people who don't identify as Christians.
Yeah, I think you've covered a couple of useful points there. Can I just clarify, the ACT, it's not just for teachers, is it? Who can join and participate with the ACT?
Anyone who works in a school or an education setting in the UK, whether in a voluntary or paid capacity. So we have members who are teaching assistants, who are HMI, inspectors, who are governors, basically anyone who has a role to play within a school environment. People who are like-minded and want to influence the culture and values spiritual environment in the educational setting.
And largely for those, because again, another point you raised, is this concept that because the Education Act is so broad, it gives a lot of leeway to schools, which gives a lot of leeway to, if you can use the phrase, activist teachers. And there are some out there who really want to push one side above other sides. And there's lots of examples on social media in the news where that does happen quite a lot. And I'm guessing that some of your members are coming from an environment where they don't know how to deal with that sort of thing when they're faced with it, either as a classroom assistant and a teacher's doing it, or a fellow teacher doing it, or a head pushing it, and they don't know how to deal with it. So what sort of services, what sort of help can you provide practically then?
We provide opportunities for connection between like-minded professionals. I think, there's lots of things that we do in our ministry. I think with regards to this kind of issue, we're trying to be more front-footed by speaking out about educational policies and educational practices which are potentially detrimental to children and young people and could place members such as our own in danger. And we're also seeking to work with many of our partners in the area, such as the Christian Institute, Christian Concern, and to help create more of a collective push to raising the profile of Christians working in education. So kind of raising our profile, speaking out, writing to particular government departments on issues. For example, with the conversion therapy ban, we were heavily involved in writing and talking to government departments about that. And I do feel that there was some kind of partial a partial victory there. I think we also seek to help teachers understand the context, the legal frameworks in which they're operating, and actually how they can make the most of the opportunities that are afforded to them by law. So, for example, in May, we have an evening with John Denning from the Christian Institute, where he's going to kind of give an overview of the frameworks in which our members and other teachers are working, and actually how he can advise us, how we can interact, how we can have open, respectful conversations and go armed with up-to-date knowledge about the Equality Act, about the curriculum they're teaching, about what is balanced, what is political and what is unbalanced and unpolitical. And
that's great. And we've spoken to John Denning ourselves. He's an excellent chap. Some of the feedback I had after speaking to John, who made it quite clear that there are lots of legal protections for teachers who are approaching things from a faith basis. But a lot of feedback I had was saying, well, that's easy enough to say, but in real life, you might not be sacked for your objection to teaching a certain aspect, but you'll end up getting pushed out for some other reason, and there's nothing you can do about it. So, you just need to be quiet. How would you deal with that kind of attitude?
That's really sad. I mean, gosh, I would say hold fast. Don't be afraid to bring these things to the fore before they reach that level of kind of animosity. Don't be afraid to gently request and go to your line manager first and say, I'm happy to talk about these things, but I'd like to also assert my right to present a Christian point of view on a topic such as marriage. You don't need to ask for a monopoly on such topics, but it's legitimate and fair that you have a seat at the table. And I think that when we communicate with gentleness and respect, then that will be interpreted and received more warmly. If you show that in the rest of your professional life you are beyond reproach and working and have the best intentions for your colleagues and your pupils, then you hope and pray that would be received well.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice. I was going to ask you what your advice for teachers would be, but that would summarize that too. I think that you hold fast, that you intervene early enough so it doesn't become a massive issue, and that you, with gentleness and respect, you say, look, I don't feel able to push this in the way you're asking me to, but what I am going to do is what the law demands and deal with it in a balanced, objective way. And then I think you've got every leg to stand on, which is great. Sarah Jane, I'm wondering, there's a lot of good work happening at the moment with the ACT, and I can't, apart from organisations like the Speech Union, I can't find similar organisations for teachers who aren't Christians, if you like. But in terms of the future, where do you, as a trustee now, where do you see the need growing? Where do you see the desire or the need for the organisation to expand, and what else do you see it doing in the future?
Well, I'd really like to build on Lizzie's previous answer, where she was telling us about how the ACT is really connected to a big network of other organizations who perhaps are not specifically education focused, but who have a lot to offer to teachers as well. And so what we seek to do is partner with them and provide training and resources for teachers. And I think increasingly now that we're more often off Zoom and back in-person conferences all over Britain are highly desirable. And so, a lot of our directors and our teachers and members too are connected themselves to other organizations. I think the Association of Christian Teachers is going to help teachers gain their confidence and find their voice. And as Lizzie was saying, the law's there to condemn us when we get things wrong, but it also points out what we can do in terms of what is right. And so it is the duty of a teacher, whether you're a Christian or not, to teach in a balanced way. And that means not overemphasizing kind of really minor, limited issues that are currently fashionable in the headlines. It means teaching the full picture. So if we are thinking about the nature of marriage, well, teachers need to tell children that it's legal in this country, that two men or two women can get married, and that's a recognized legal institution. But we're one of the very few countries in the world where that's legal. It was only made legal in 2014. There are so many opportunities to have interesting conversations around why that's the case. And, why don't we have laws that allow polygamy when some other cultures do? Why have we had laws to do with adultery in the UK if it's so good to experiment and explore our desires? So I think it's going to be a good time for the Association of Christian Teachers to also inspire teachers to kind of get equipped, know the law, know the history, know our Christian heritage, and teach in the fullness of the light, I suppose, of all that Christian marriage can do to benefit society and monogamous marriage.
Yeah, I think you raised some very valid points there. If I can pick up on one or two, this idea of people not feeling they're alone. You might be the only teacher with these views or expressing these views in a school, but that doesn't mean you're alone. And one, I think, really useful facet of the ACT is that you can network and be in contact with other people, learn how they've dealt with things, learn about how they've encountered things, and you just feel that you're not alone there, which is very, very, very valuable. The other thing you mentioned was resources, and I think that we're crying out, nobody's producing resources which put marriage on an equal footing. Dare I say, there are some people who are doing it from a Christian perspective, but a lot of schools don't want it from a faith-based perspective. Sure. They want it from an evidence-based perspective, secular, dare I use that word. And there is enough evidence there to enable those resources to be produced. So that's another great thing you guys could do going forward.
I think as well, we have, such a rich cultural heritage here and globally that, if you're teaching literature or you're teaching history or philosophy in schools, there are always opportunities to examine marriage relationships. And, Shakespeare is a great way of teaching that. And so the Association of Christian Teachers will be developing the kinds of resources that help teachers to address these issues in a way that's, really academically enriching as well, that we're not just teaching this idea of citizenship as if it's isolated from the big picture of, a rich academic curriculum. Because I can find, that children can just switch off if you say we're going to teach happiness today, or we're going to teach what makes a good marriage. But if you say, let's look at Romeo and Juliet, here we have two teenagers who are virgins, who are getting married without their parents' consent. Let's ask some questions about this. So actually giving living examples from literature and history, I think, is a great way to teach this. And it's something that the Association of Christian Teachers can do to help inspire and produce resources, I think.
You'll have to do some online English lit classes, Sarah Jane. The other thing I was interested in that you touched on, or I picked up from something one of you said, is this idea of how people can get more involved generally, not just teachers, but actually we need people at all stages of the school to get involved. We need parents to get involved if they have feelings. They've got nothing to risk at all, of course, as parents compared to teachers. They can say what they want. They're service users, if you like, from that perspective. Also getting involved at the governance level. I don't know if you do anything in terms of supporting people or teachers who do have opportunity to get involved at the governance level. But also for our listeners, I would say it's really important that you think about getting involved at governance levels within schools, because that makes a great difference too. Lizzie, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. In fact, we ran a session at the tail end of last year, encouraging members to think about becoming governors. So teacher governors, but it wasn't just kind of limited to teachers, any members. And in fact, I coerced my husband to become a governor of our children's school. I mean, it's such an instrumental role where you can really hold schools to account and support schools in their in the way that they teach particular topics and particular subjects, and the way that they help to really kind of pin down their ethos and vision as well. And I think that's something that is going to be incredibly important as we go into the future. And I think, even thinking about becoming trustees of local multi-academy trusts as well, because as we know, more and more schools are joining MATs, and these trustees are going to have an even bigger role over a larger number of schools, in directing vision, in directing values, etc., and curriculum. And I just wanted to go back to something you said earlier and just point out an organisation which you may know about that comes from a secular perspective, but also is incredibly passionate about the causes, consequences of family breakdown, and lobbies for more conservative understandings of marriage, the exposure of that in the curriculum, and that's the Family Education Trust. And I'm sure many of your supporters will be aware of that, but they do precisely what you were suggesting earlier. They look at evidence, and they produce materials, resources, and conferences advocating for conservative understandings of marriage being promoted, or at least teaching on that being exposed. So I would certainly advise that people go and look them up online.
I think the other experience that we offer at the Association of Christian Teachers is that of actually establishing schools and setting up networks also that support schools. So I know one of our directors has started schools in the past, and I think something we're seeing more in the UK at the moment is that parents usually, or sometimes teachers, are getting fed up with schools where they can't get their voice heard, or they just feel that the curriculum isn't really very balanced, and they're starting new schools. And there's a conference on the 21st of May that I'm going to about that in Dudley. And so the Association of Christian Teachers can actually help by equipping people with some of the information they need about, how to navigate the legislation, all the practical steps in terms of how to set up a school. And it doesn't have to be a school in the model of a maintained or an independent school. There are lots of really flexible, interesting models coming out after the lockdowns and people being online, where you've got kind of homeschooling co-ops, people who are learning online, doing a bit of tutoring professionally, parents stepping in to fill the gaps. And I think, the ACT is really interested in that, and we'd really love to have homeschooling parents join our number too. And we're just interested to explore what different kinds of education there are out there, as well as the maintained schools that the state run. And it's really important that we have Christians there shining a light and making the case for a balanced curriculum that includes the Christian voice. But it would also, I think, benefit everyone if there were more Christian schools. And that's something that the Association of Christian Teachers can help with.
And I think, I mean, that's a good point to maybe begin to wrap up on that. What you're looking for as the Association of Christian Teachers is not something specific for Christians, but it's just an important aspect of free speech more generally, that teaching should be balanced, that teaching should be fair and objective, and that children go to school to find out how to learn and aren't taught what to think, but how to think. Would you agree?
Absolutely. You know, teaching is about helping children to sharpen their tools for discerning the truth. Yeah. And we need to teach them that the truth is discoverable, that it's not a futile quest, right? So there is a truth about marriage to be discovered. You can't have a situation where all things are true and all things are good. So children know in their hearts right and wrong, and teachers need to help them to understand their conscience and listen to it. And so I think that means obeying the law, doing our statutory duty, which is teaching a full and balanced curriculum, which is sometimes against the current of the fashion, the pedagogy, and also just really reassuring and encouraging parents that it's worth pursuing, that there is something to learn. It's not all just relative.
Well, listen, it's great that you're both involved. It's great that the ACT is there. We'll put up your website on the screen. Lizzie, what's the website address?
www.christian-teachers.org.uk.
Or you can just type Association of Christian Teachers into Google, or other browsers exist and other search engines exist, and you'll find it quite easily. And anyone involved with a school can join up. You have I think a doctrinal basis of faith, don't you? But anyone involved in that can join up.
We have a basis of belief, but yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. And I'm very grateful for the work you're doing. I think it's a good example. I wish you all the very best going forward. Perhaps in a year or so you can come back and tell us how it's growing, how good it's doing. Any closing remarks from either of you? Sarah Jane?
Well, we just hope at the ACT that we're going to be bumping into people more often around the country with our events in person, in collaboration with other organizations. So we really look forward to meeting you, and please get in touch. And if you have any questions about what we do, or if you have questions pertaining to the things that you're struggling with as a parent or a teacher, then please do ask, because there's a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that we have either on our board or with the organizations that we're connected with that we can share with you. And we don't want people to be worried and afraid.
Great. And Lizzie, any last thoughts you want to leave with our viewers?
I'd just say, particularly to teachers or those who work in school, to keep going. You've got a worthy calling, and your vocation is valuable, and your influence in schools on young people's lives is invaluable. They will watch you, they'll note how you behave, how you treat them, and you never know what long-term impact you'll have on their lives. And for Christians in particular, you may be the only Christian present in that life, and what a privilege.
Yeah, absolutely. I got to say, teachers, were I king, and I must be like 65 millionth in line for king or something like that. But I would say actually we should be paying teachers £100,000, getting the very top people into teaching, because it really is looking after those young minds and setting them off in life. Really is. I can't see a job really much more important than that. It's fantastic. So, well done to you both for all the work that you're doing. Sarah Jane, I know you've got a class coming up very, very shortly. Can't keep those potential future prime ministers waiting, can we? So can I thank you both for all that you're doing? I wish you all the very best in what's going to come. And thanks for your time today. And look forward to speaking to you both again.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Good.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Tony.
Take care now.
See you.